So welcome back in here to Carp's Corner. Another big week of college football in the books. And man, it is getting exciting with everything that we're seeing here. NFL stories are great. College coaching firings, some have happened. Some are, I guess, happened already, and people will be able to finish out the season. But there's going to be a lot of great stuff, and there's a lot of great storylines as this season moves on. So we're going to dive into some of those today, taking a look at some of the games from last season and what we saw there, or games from last week, rather, what we saw there and kind of how they impacted the national championship race and the college football playoff race, because not in the not too near distant future, if you will, there will be a college football playoff selection committee. There'll be a show. They'll line everybody up, and we'll figure out exactly kind of what the committee's thinking, when the hay is starting to get in the barn a little more. And as some of these teams can maybe do some things to bolster their standing. And maybe for Cincinnati, the best thing that you can have happen is obviously you take care of business and you win your games, but Notre Dame keeps winning for you, because I ultimately believe Notre Dame will be a 10 win, 9 win at worst squad, which will help Cincinnati immensely. Starting off with some of the games, looking out at the Big 12 as it currently stands, we got Oklahoma State was taking on Texas. Like, it's the thing, like, is Texas back? As soon as Texas starts winning a couple games, all of a sudden, man, they draw the eyes of the nation. And believe me, Casey Thompson, is playing fairly well for the most part. Bijan Robinson's been pretty good. They had OU, they had them, they let them off the hook and couldn't find a way to close the deal. So kudos to the Sooners. And if you're Texas, well, you've got a long hill to climb. So now all of a sudden they've got to take on Oklahoma State, who has been kind of the underrated team. When you think about Okie State and Mike Gundy, I always think of, quarterbacks that are kind of NFL caliber fringe guys, great in the system, probably don't have the greatest skills, but they can get the ball out, and they always seem to have some pretty good receivers on the edge. And, occasionally they have a really talented running back to kind of pair it with them. But Oklahoma State, I mean, my goodness, they did a great job of weathering the storm. Texas jumps out, Oklahoma State finds a way to kind of stay in that game and then dominates really kind of the second half and fourth quarter after battling back from being down a couple of scores early in the game. And really what it hinged on is that Okie State defense, which for the longest time in the Big 12, we always say no one plays defense. And it seems like the scores are coming down a little bit this year. And I don't know if that's a function of the fact defenses are better, or maybe offensive football just isn't quite as good. But Oklahoma State down the stretch, forcing 3 or 4 and outs in the fourth quarter before ultimately Casey Thompson threw the interception that basically wrapped up the game. But in your last 5 possessions, you have an interception and then 4 3 and outs, or a 4 and out in there as well, turnover on downs. That's a heck of a job right there for an Okie State defense. And like I said, they're not the high flying offense that they've been. I don't think right now, after watching them play as much as I have, that, they can compete with maybe some of those teams in the top 5 or 6. But you never know. They keep getting it done with defense, and we'll see how they kind of continue to play. And as they match up, and you've got Bedlam on the horizon here to finish the season, we'll see kind of how Okie State is able to kind of evolve and how they play. Purdue traveling to Iowa, number 2 Hawkeyes. Big Ten's got 5 teams ranked in the top 10. And these are the games that all of a sudden, the Big Ten loses. And it's like, what are you doing, Iowa? Why did you lose this game? However, there were signs that I wrote about, in my big games and best bets. Like, Purdue was really good on the ground with their rushing defense. Their defense was fairly decent in general, and they had an elite receiver in David Bell. And so here's the recipe to be able to beat Iowa. And it's teams that run the ball pretty well and play really good defense. If you can get out to a lead on them early, force them to play a chase game, and then you don't get pressure on the quarterback, because this was the other fatal flaw with Iowa. And they've had some injuries in their secondary, and so that's all part of it, and I get it. But their secondary is good, but I don't think that they're elite. And so if you can give their quarterback time, they'll be able to pick you apart. And what Jeff Brom did is he rotated 3 quarterbacks throughout the entirety of the game, kept Iowa's defensive line, a little bit at bay doing that. And they did get some pressure, but in doing so, they weren't really able to impact the quarterback that much. David Bell comes in, boom, does a great job, over 200 yards receiving. And he's done a really good job every time he's played Iowa. So this isn't just something that came out of left field. Does a phenomenal job with that. They didn't turn, and Iowa didn't really force any turnovers. Like they had feasted on turnovers to the point where I believe after the Maryland game, half of their scores had come off of turnovers. And so if you're not giving that offense short fields, because they can run the ball okay, and Spencer Petras is all right. But if you force them to drive 80-yard fields and you force them to have to throw the football, it was going to be tough. I thought Iowa would still win this game. I thought it'd be within the, 11 and a half points, that it was earlier in the week as far as the line. But it seemed like a game that Iowa could get caught a little bit. I thought they'd pull it out. I thought being at Kinnick would help. But, Iowa's got a bye week coming up. Sometimes you overlook, and they were coming off an emotional game and a big win and a huge comeback against Penn State. So they dropped down to 11. Purdue slides into the top 25. And so, Iowa's fallen from the ranks. And I think that that's about what it was going to be anyway, whether it was in the Big Ten championship or they got picked off some point in time. They were going to lose a game this year. It was just a function of when. And I think we kind of knew how it would ultimately look. So kind of just outline that there. Michigan State, Indiana. Michigan State, obviously top 10 team. Indiana struggling this year. We're supposed to be great at all these expectations. They've had some injuries. They've had some issues. Haven't really lived up to what they were supposed to be. But this is a game that I feel like historically Michigan State would always lose. And it's amazing how the guys in the desert get it right. Spread was 4.5. I don't think they called for a 20 to 15 score and a Spartan win, but they cover the line and find a way to move on. And, Indiana played pretty good football. They slowed down Michigan State immensely. It wasn't a pretty win for the Spartans, but they were able to stop Indiana's running game enough. They forced it all on reserve quarterback Jack Tuttle, had a couple of interceptions, didn't play terrible outside of that, but they forced him to throw the ball an immense number of times. And when you're going to ask your quarterback to do that, I think it was 52. You're never going to be able to win when you're asking your backup quarterback to do that. So they can get Michael Penix Jr. back later in the year. We'll see if they can make a push. They have Ohio State coming up this weekend. And now Michigan State goes to a bye. And in 2 weeks, Halloween weekend, you've got Michigan State and Michigan. You've got Penn State and Ohio State. So 2 huge games in the Big Ten that we're going to be able to have there. Now, on to the SEC. We'll get to Coach O. We'll get to Lane here in a little bit. But the Kentucky-Georgia game, I thought Kentucky played pretty well in the first half. It's obvious Georgia's incredibly talented. And I've talked for weeks, a little bit like Iowa's formula. If you can slow down the Georgia rushing attack, and that's a big if because they're really good. And I think that Kentucky held them to around 160 yards. They did a pretty darn good job. But if you can slow them down, we'll see if Stetson Bennett can beat you through the air. And you've got to put some points up as well. And when you watch that game in the first half, Georgia steamrolls down, gets a couple of scores. Kentucky manufactures a few stops, and they put together on their scoring drive in the first half. I think I tweeted this out. It was one of the most impressive, 7 or 8 play sequences for Kentucky with misdirection, play action, screens, throwbacks, everything you saw for them to be able to score on Georgia. And they had to score at that point or the game was going to be out of control early on. They end up scoring there. They take it into halftime, I believe just down 7. But Kentucky's good. They're just not in the class of Georgia. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's the last game that they potentially lose, until maybe a bowl matchup. They're a really good team, and Mark Stoops has them playing at an incredibly high level. They've got a good defense, and they're creative enough offensively to be able to manufacture enough points to win games. And that's what allowed them to beat teams, like Florida and LSU. They just can't match up to a team that's playing really good. And the guy that we've kind of beat up on and, Mr. Smellgood, Stetson Bennett himself, threw for 250 yards. And I'm not going to sit there and just besmirch that. That was something that was really, really impressive. 3 touchdowns. When you limit, Georgia, I use the term limit to 162 yards on the ground. I mean, that goes a long way. And Will Levis, he attempted 42 passes. That's probably not what Kentucky had in mind. You held the Wildcats to 51 yards rushing, so that Georgia defense ultimately held up in a big way. And I think that that's the anticipation for them all year. Kentucky was a little banged up front on the defensive side of the ball, but this Georgia team is for real. I don't know if there'll be a team that will be able to slow down the Georgia Bulldogs rushing attack to under 100 yards. If they can do that, okay, then we'll be able to see what maybe they can do throughout the air. And ultimately, when Kirby Smart has to make the decision on Stetson Bennett or JT Daniels. You've kind of built a lot of momentum, and with how well Stetson Bennett played, and we can talk about the point spread, but when it's a game where it's 1 versus 11, I mean, that's a big time matchup. And Stetson Bennett, was able to rise to the challenge and play really good football. And so I think he's probably has the driver's seat right now to hold on to that job, because as talented as JT Daniels is, and people look at him as potentially an NFL guy, and Stetson Bennett's the walk on, sometimes coaches begin to roll with the guy who they see make those plays, who they've watched their team kind of rally around, and you feel like that's who Stetson Bennett is, and you've watched him kind of do that. So coaches have a hard time unseeing something that they really, really enjoy. So kudos, Georgia, best team in the country right now by far. I questioned them earlier. I don't know about their passing game. They need to get some guys healthy, most notably JT Daniels, and then figure that out. But they've answered every other question that you could possibly have, and they've done it against some pretty good teams. Now we go to the game who I thought this would be the game that would ultimately get Ed Orgeron fired. So I was half right. Ed Orgeron was fired after the Florida game. I did not see LSU winning this game at all, not even close. And they fought back. The guys played hard. They found a way to win against the Florida team that isn't one of the best in the country, but they're pretty darn good. They do some good things. Obviously, their quarterback situation was in flux. They're rolling guys through. Emory Jones hit a big third down when he came in, in relief when there were some injuries and they were shuffling some things around. And so Florida just didn't lay down. They scored 42 points. LSU scores 49, and they ultimately get the win. Now, you find out Ed Orgeron is fired after the game. And all of a sudden you're scratching your head. And believe me, I was the lead dog in this, thinking, you fired the guy after the win. What's going on here? It didn't make any sense. I thought they would give Ed Orgeron the rest of the season, see if he can get hot. Maybe he pulls a rabbit out of the hat and beats Bama. Maybe. Didn't think it would happen, but there's crazier things that have happened. And then all of a sudden you find out that the firing or the decision to, quote, part ways happened after Kentucky. And remember what I had said. LSU fans, Kentucky was ranked, 11th, and they were really good. They don't like losing to Kentucky. It's a basketball school in their mind. And regardless of how good they've been, that's how they looked, and that's what they were thinking. And Kentucky, won that game pretty handily and controlled the clock, controlled the game. And so with that, it's like, okay, they made the decision. And here's why they did it. They made the decision because they didn't want him to get hot. They didn't want to have happen what I just said, where you start winning games, and all of a sudden maybe he wins 8 or 9 games and wins a game he shouldn't. And then all of a sudden now you're faced with a decision where the fan base, who I think really likes Ed Orgeron because he's one of them. He's more, he to me is almost a caricature of what the head coach at LSU looks like. And you think about it, their last 3 coaches have won national championships. That's including Ed. But this stuff starts leaking out, and it's not just things that are happening on the field, but maybe the lack of attention to detail, which here's the other thing. Coach O, I don't think anybody's going to confuse him with the great X's and O's coach. He's a line coach. He's tough. He's a motivator. Guys want to play for him, I think, when things are going well. And, he has everybody. He's a great recruiter because he's a nice guy. He's a salesman, and I think he's selling something now that he personally believes in. He's an LSU Tigers fan. And so that was easy for him to be able to do that. But you lose Dave Aranda, you lose Joe Brady. Those guys are gone. I feel like maybe the hiring process, it's been rumored for some of the bigger positions, wasn't taken as seriously as they would have liked it to be. So you factor that in. It's like being able to recruit players is one thing. Being able to maintain players is another. Being able to hire coaches the first time, that's one thing. Being able to replace those guys and find guys after they are so good they move on, that's another. And it seemed like Ed Orgeron was kind of failing at that. You saw guys sitting out, and for whatever reason, I'm not besmirching the guy, but you wonder about the culture. And then you look at, the offense and the defense, and it seems like it's kind of struggling and it wasn't really coherent. LSU should never be giving up 42 points. They've got too much talent on that defense, and they've been recruiting at a high level. You've got to get it together. And so then you factor in the fact, like you're hearing Title IX investigation, I guess, that was handled improperly. I don't know a ton about that yet. Going to dig in more to it. But you got that pending. The university doesn't want to deal with that. All right. So you've got that moving on. And then all of a sudden, too, it's the fact that Coach O has become a socialite. He's apparently out there, dating a lot of women. It's fine. He's a single man. He's entitled to do that. All right, bring some of the ladies to practice. Some of these women, had children. That's fine too. That's perfectly okay. Bringing the kids to practice. And, they're kind of running around in the drills. And believe me, a lot of coaches do that. But they usually reserve it for kind of like one night a week. It's after practice, kind of Thursday night, family night is what most of the coaches have. And they let the players eat with their families and this and that. And if it was just maybe one or two girls, it would be fine. But from what I'd heard, there was multiple ones. You're seeing pictures leaked out now on social media. And so LSU agrees to pay the guy $17 million to walk away. I understand it. They want to get ahead of this. They want to move in the right direction. And here's the reason of why that is happening. Jimbo Fisher's got a big extension at A&M. Keep saying this in the SEC, especially in the West. Nick Saban's not going to coach forever. And so they looked at this. They've hired three coaches. The last three coaches have all won national championships. You get this next guy right, it could be four because, LSU is going to have a ton of talent. Because at some point, Nick Saban is going to retire. I don't know when it is, when the vampire gets hit with like a silver stake. And I say that in all, jest, being that Nick Saban looks like he doesn't age and no one has any idea when he'll slow down. I put him and Coach Krzyzewski in the same category because they've been so dominant for so long. But one day he will retire. And when that happens, in the Game of Thrones, who will be the next team in the SEC West to begin to climb the mountain and take that perch and sit on the Iron Throne? And so that's what I think LSU is looking at this from the long-term play of figuring out we can get one of these guys. I don't know if it's, Luke Fickell at Cincinnati, though I don't think he'd take that job. A Mel Tucker up with Michigan State. You look at what he's done. Granted, they struggled last year, but look how good they've been this season. He's got ties. He coached under Saban. Believe he was at LSU as maybe a GA or an assistant way back during Saban's first tenure there. He has the experience of Bama, Georgia, being in the South. Like he checks kind of all those boxes if they want to bring him back down there. And so we'll see. Maybe he's happy at Michigan State. Maybe don't want to take the job. I don't know. But that would seem like two logical guys that they would look at. I'm sure there's coordinators out there. But I think you need somebody at LSU that's been there before, who understands the culture, understands the expectations. Because Louisiana is a state unlike any other. And the people are very proud. They're unique human beings. They're fantastic. But there is a certain culture, the Creole culture, that I didn't experience until I ultimately played in the NFL. And they want a guy who's one of them. Now, if you win, everybody's one of them. But it'll give you a little bit longer leash. I think, especially with Les Miles, he wasn't one of them. He was, more of a Northerner. You win the national championship, it buys you a little bit more time. So my man Ed running around like Bigger and McCracken out of the Kingpin, factor in everything else, decided to part ways, finish coaching the season. He'll give these impassioned speeches. He's great. I love him. I hope he lands on his feet. People have thrown around him going to Bama to go to the Nick Saban, coach's rehabilitation clinic. Saban hires X's and O's guys. Those are the guys he brings in. I do not think that he would bring in a Bill O'Brien or brought in a Bill O'Brien. Don't think he'd bring in an Ed Orgeron. So with that, who knows what's next for Coach O? He's got plenty of cash and he's got plenty of time to decide. Now, on to the Tennessee bit. Lane, Ole Miss, back in Knoxville, win a game 31-26. Ends a little uglier than I think people would have liked. I understand fans being upset, Lane. I understand a lot of it. Heupel's got Tennessee, I think, headed in the right direction. I don't know if we really need to throw things on the field, especially something that can injure. Ketchup, like mustard bottles, all right. Golf ball, man, you hit somebody in the head with a golf ball, you knock them out. I love Lane's response, kind of, water off a duck's back. I'm going to put this little plexiglass frame at the house. And frankly, I would too. If you're going to throw stuff like that at me, someone threw a water bottle on him when he's walking off the field. He tosses it back. Lane handled it about as well as he possibly could. I understand the passion for Volunteers Nation. I understand what he did. Believe me, I'm not going to sit here and say that it wasn't ruthless, but to hold it for this long and ultimately you want to make signs. That's great. But throwing things on the field at a guy, and he doesn't have a helmet on. Players that wear helmets, I get it. And I'm not trying to say that you should protect coaches more than players. It's not that at all. But players have protection on. They have the helmet. The golf ball's not going to hurt them. You hit someone in the head with a golf ball that you whipped up and threw. I mean, I don't know. You might be able to kill him, but at worst, you do some nice damage. And I'm not saying Lane Kiffin's a saint. Like I said, when he left, Tennessee fans, believe me, you want to write some stuff on signs and do whatever you want, scream, boo, yell. I'm all for it. But throwing projectiles at a football coach who just beat your team walking off the field, I don't know if I can get fully behind that. That might be a little extreme and it might be a little much. Before we get quick couple NFL stories, college rankings, you got Cincinnati sitting at number 2 behind Georgia. I talked to some people who cover in the SEC, and one guy for Dogs Nation, and he said he thought Cincinnati deserved to be in the conversation. Thought they deserved to win the game last year against Georgia. Because of that, he's like, their talent is good enough. Can they win the game? Maybe. We'll see. But they definitely can be in the game. And so because of that, I hope Cincinnati stays up there, and I hope they win out, and I hope Notre Dame gives them the help they need, and I think they ultimately will. Now you have Bama and OU sitting right there at 3 and 4, with Ohio State right behind them lurking. So this is going to be a little more of a traditional year. We thought it wouldn't, but it looks like it might be rounding back into form to where it's a lot of the usual suspects at the top. It's Bama, it's Georgia, it's Ohio State, it's Oklahoma, sitting right there ready to go. And then you have Michigan and Penn State and Okie State kind of lurking, right on the outside. So you've got some of the usual suspects there. To talk quickly, Ohio State or Dallas Cowboys, talking quickly about the Cowboys. And I'll tell you this, like I've been reserved on throwing praise on Dak Prescott, because to me, playing there with Tony Romo, I know what the standard is and how tough it is to be the Cowboys quarterback week in and week out. And I don't like to pull out the anointing oil too early. But man, what he did against New England and Bill Belichick's a heck of a football coach now. And he did not want Dak to be throwing for that many yards. And Dak went out there and took it to his defense. Now, granted, Dallas's offense is really, really talented, but I didn't think that Dak ultimately had that in him at that level. And he's been consistent. He's been a leader, and he's fully won me over. And when Drew Brees is sitting here saying he looks like a top 3, top 5 quarterback, well, that's good enough for me, because I understand how good Drew was, and he's not going to throw that praise out there when it's not warranted, and to be loose with it. Dak's looking really good. He's carrying this Dallas team with Diggs, who Diggs gets the great pick 6. And then I do love this, and we'll finish off the Cowboys with this. The pick 6, everybody's cheering in Dallas. They're rocking back at home. I know it's up in New England. And then all of a sudden, Bill, hold my beer, Josh McDaniels, this guy's a gambler. What are we going to do? Double move him, go get him, house call. And so you giveth, you taketh away. And I love Diggs in the presser. He's owning up to it after the game. That was on me. I can't jump that stuff. Yeah. And it's good. But that's how good of a coach Bill is and Josh McDaniel. I mean, those guys went after it. They got it. They hit it. And it was a great game until the very end. And it seems like New England just keep coming up a little short every single game this year. And I didn't think Dallas could do anything in the playoffs. And I don't know if they're a Super Bowl team, but I think they're a team that could win a playoff game, maybe 2. We'll see where it ultimately shakes out and how they look down the stretch and how healthy they ultimately stay too. And then to kind of wrap up the weekend and put a big bow on everything, Sunday Night Football. You got Russell Wilson out. It's Pittsburgh, it's Seattle. And I love Russ, man. He seems like one of the nicest and most wholesome guys you're going to find. Maybe I'm completely, taken back by that. I played against him when he was early in his career up there in Seattle. And I've heard a lot of good things about him. But him going through the routine before the game, and there'll be people who say, Bob, you're full of crap. And this is him being serious. And we got the TV cameras out there. We're taking a full knee in a huddle, calling a play, running up to the line, setting up, and doing it all again. I understand the game replication. I know what it's all about. I don't have a problem with him working through drops, working through route progressions, flipping his hips, making the fake throw. I don't know if we need to be on the knee in the huddle calling the fake play to nobody around. I feel like that might have been a little bit theatrical. Just a tinge, just a smidge, maybe. I don't know. But Russ is a good dude. They need him back desperately because they're a different team. They can run the ball a little bit better now. They got that going, but my goodness, they need him back. But all the theatrics and everything that separates some of this, I find it highly amusing and highly enjoyable to watch. So we'll kind of see where it goes from here. But we're rounding into form here. A couple of weeks left in October. College football season heating up in a hurry. And we'll see who some of these coaching vacancies get filled by. Because I know there's some big-time jobs, and there's some guys out there who are big-time candidates, but they may be moving. They may be not. That's this edition of Carp's Corner. Thanks.